What's up, friends, and welcome back to the show. Today's guest is the ever fascinating Dr. Bill Schindler. Bill is him. He does it all, and he's got the stories and the education to boot. A anthropology professor turned food educator. He's opened a restaurant called the Modern Stone Age Kitchen. He wrote a best-selling book. He's even been on a reality TV show. Safe to say, this guy brings the receipts and the wisdom of what it means to eat like a human, but more than to live like a human, that how modern culture and modern food has disconnected us from who we are, and it's one of the primary drivers of why we are so sick. But Bill explains all of this food stuff like almost nobody out there. So real, so relatable, and so grounded in anthropology and evolution. Truly fascinating. Let's get into it with Dr. Bill Schindler.
All right, Dr. Bill is in the house. I was hoping you'd wear your usual shirt that proudly proclaims "Eat like a human." We've got the modern Stone Age on, which is something else I want to talk about. But I want to start right there. Eat like a human, because to me, I understand exactly what that message is pointing at. But it also feels like we're a bit of a species with amnesia, and we need to be reminded how to eat like a human. So the million-dollar question right out of the bat is, why have we forgotten how to eat like humans, and what are the implications because of that?
It's a great question. Maybe let me define what it means first, or at least how I define it. And I know it sounds kind of silly and it sounds kind of gimmicky, but it's a real thing. Like eating like a human is something we've certainly forgotten how to do, but it's actually something that took us millions of years to figure out how to do. And I think the basic tenets of it are this. And actually, what I'm going to lay out right here over the next just few minutes, and I'm glad you're giving me an opportunity to do this at the beginning, lays the groundwork for everything I hope we talk about for the entire time we're here. But everything, my entire approach to food, diet, and health, how our restaurant, the Modern Stone Age Kitchen, the foundation of all of that. So the idea is this. One thing that I think we have to come to terms with as humans is that, number one, we eat differently than every other animal on the planet, which I think is easy for other people to comprehend. But we have one of the weakest and most inefficient digestive tracts of any animal. And we, even with this, the triumph of us as humans is that over millions of years, even with this incredibly inefficient and small and weak digestive tract, we've figured out ways of creating technologies that allow us to get resources from the environment that otherwise we couldn't access without these technologies. But even more importantly, our body can't safely and efficiently unlock the nutrients in these resources because we're not physically designed to do it. Our digestive tract just can't do it. So we've created over millions of years different technologies to access these resources and, more importantly, access the nutrition in these resources. And because of those technological advancements, we have fueled our growing bodies and brains over millions of years. And we're sitting here having this conversation because of those changing diets, but those diets are on the back of our technological advancements. So it isn't necessarily, when I say eat like a human, it isn't, eat this much protein and this much fat and this much carbohydrates, although those are important considerations. What I mean by saying eating like a human is ensuring that we're using the right technologies to access and process food to make it as safe, nutrient dense, and bioavailable for our digestive tract as possible.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I once heard Rob Wolf say, nothing makes sense unless you look at it through the lens of evolution. And that made something click in my brain. And I've always had a fascination with the ancient anthropology, the Paleolithic, etc. I know you've got a background in that. When did you get pulled in? Because it's obviously influenced a lot of your work thereafter, and everything that you think about now is having that context of evolution and history. Tell me a little bit about your background in academia and what got you started.
Well, I've always been interested in archaeology and things that are old. I didn't, and my dad and I would always go out hunting for arrowheads in the fields and that sort of thing, and always reading books about early American fur trappers and the like, and Native Americans. And I always had this fascination for things that were old. I just didn't have any comprehension of how old things really could be. My version of old was 500 years, which is exactly how, here in America, how we're taught about, our history class starts at 500 years ago. Other parts of the world, it obviously starts early, but for us, it's 500 years. And when I started to really understand how deep our evolutionary past goes, and I got pulled in, I got so excited, and I got passionate and down this rabbit hole about all these things. But what's fascinating is that this entire time I was learning about evolution and archaeology and prehistoric technologies and that's where my specialty is in ancestral technologies like stone tool production and prehistoric ceramics and that sort of thing. I was diving down these rabbit holes and learning from people all over the world and these ancient sites and doing all these wonderful things. I didn't have a grasp on how I should eat. And I was still trying all these fad diets and trying to, I was battling my weight and all sorts of, metabolic disease and all sorts of things. And it wasn't until I realized that the answers that I needed to heal myself and to nourish myself were literally exactly where I was spending the other half of my life that I really started to get on the track that I'm on now.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? You had to go all the way back to find out the modern solution to an ancient problem that's only existing because we've become so disconnected from that in many ways. Yeah. I've heard you say on other podcasts that in your studies and your explorations, you've really found a bit of technology that isn't basically fully focused on obtaining or capturing food. So like when you think about our evolutionary history, just how central is the story of food to the human being?
It's central to literally everything. I mean, and what's fascinating is that almost every single, just like you said, almost every single prehistoric technology that was invented over 3.5 million years has something to do with food, getting food, processing food, sharing food, redistributing food, all the detoxifying food, all of those things. I mean, like literally almost every single one. The other ones, and there's not many of them, have to do with protecting yourself from the other elements. These things that are key to survival, subsistence, and triumph. But given the fact that the majority of the time we as a species were actually finding ourselves or restricted ourselves to environments that we could live in without the added benefit of technologies, then food became the focus. A great example is this. I'm here in Maryland on the Eastern Shore. And today's a beautiful day. I mean, it's an ungodly beautiful day. It's about 70 degrees. It's a little bit warmer than it normally would be at this time of year. And if you walked outside right now, I'm in t-shirts, I'm in jeans. If I walked outside, it's a beautiful day. I belong here. But in 2 months, if I walk outside, I'm going to recognize very easily that I have absolutely no business living in Maryland. Like literally the human body has no business living in Maryland. And because in the middle of February, if I took all my clothes off without the technologies that allow me to survive here, I would die. And because we're living in places at millions of years ago where we didn't need clothes, we didn't need shelter, we didn't need to protect ourselves from these things, the technological advancements were almost always focused on food. And one thing and you might have heard this story before, I'm going to tell it again because I think it was a light bulb moment for me in my life. Well before I did the show for the Great Human Race for National Geographic, students when I was teaching at Washington College wanted me to be on the Naked and Afraid show. And I didn't want to be on Naked and Afraid. I still don't want to be on Naked and Afraid. But they thought, because of the things I was teaching them how to make stone tools and butcher deer and make fire with friction, all these things. They're like, you're perfect for this show. And I didn't want to say, no, I'm not. So I figured I'd let the blame fall on my wife. So I asked her, I sat her down one day at night and I said, hey, listen, the students want me to be on Naked and Afraid. What do you think? And I knew damn well she was going to say, there's absolutely no way. And she sat there and she thought about it. And I started to get nervous. She was thinking as long as she was. And finally she said, that would be okay. I said, that would be okay. What do you mean that would be okay? We're married. Like, this show. There's like two naked people that don't know each other, a man and a woman and all this. She goes, no. I know exactly what the show is. She said, as soon as, you get out there and there's a man and a woman who are, they're naked in the middle of nowhere. And maybe one of them the first day has sort of the amorous thoughts about somebody else. By the next day, when they're covered in mosquito bites, they're already hungry. Yep. They have diarrhea, sunburn. The last thing they're thinking about is procreating. And I'm like, oh. And she's like, that's the safest place you could be. Well, it turns out a few weeks later, National Geographic called to do the other show, so I was saved. But what fascinates me about that moment is we think about the past. Now, sometimes many of us romanticize the past, and I definitely do that quite often as well. But for the most part, we think it's a bunch of knucklehead, cavemen and cavewomen running around and barely surviving. The story of our ancestral dietary past, our ancestral past in general, and our evolutionary past is not one of survival. Because Christina was absolutely right. People that are surviving rarely get even in the position to be able to have the opportunity to procreate. And even if they did,
Right.
the chances that that baby would come to full term and it would be a successful birth, and that baby could then be successful enough to be able to be fertile. And that isn't the story of survival. Survival is barely getting by. And the story of our ancestral dietary past is not one of subsistence either, because in subsistence, you're just the status quo. Like you're doing
Right.
just enough and you're good to go. You don't want for anything, but there's nothing good happening either. It's just the status quo. The story of our ancestral dietary past is one of not only increasing human populations around the world. That isn't, I mean, the triumph is that we were able to support, massive growth in body and brain size, which takes a tremendous amount of nutrition. Not only a tremendous amount of nutrition, but a tremendous amount of nutrition that our body can actually access. And because of that, we're sitting here with these huge brains and these huge bodies that our digestive tract cannot support without those technological advancements. It is a story of our ancestors were crushing it.
Yeah, it's wonderfully synthesized. There is this, I guess it's still a little bit up for debate, but there is a lot of evidence to suggest that there was something like a doubling of the human brain size, right? Around 2 million years ago, up to maybe 800,000 years ago. And over the course of kind of evolutionary history, that was really fast and really rapid.
Mm-hmm.
How you think food was central to that piece, and like nose to tail, and the ability to then, it was like a chicken or egg scenario, right? Eating more food, but then that fueled brain so we could collaborate and maybe take down bigger mammoths. Like, what do you think that is going on in that story, particularly with our brains, right? Because it seems our superpower is this ability to think and coordinate.
Oh, absolutely. So I think there's several different pieces here, and I'm not going to pretend to even have a grasp of it, but I at least think I'm asking some of the right questions, and this is how I frame it, at least in my head. At the moment that we started making our first tool, which is a stone tool about 3.5 million years ago, which allowed us to access meat for the first time, that's the moment to me that is the spark that ignited all of these things, because it is at that moment that we, this creation of this very simple, basic stone tool, sharper and more durable than anything else on our bodies, allowed us for the first time to interact with the world around us, with our environment, not hindered by what we solely have biologically. We could make this incredibly sharp tool in less than a second. In this case, we were butchering animals with it, scavenged animals. That's the moment that everything started to change. Because of that tool, we started introducing meat in our diet, which we didn't have in our diet before, and bone marrow, which we didn't have in our diet before. So that's the moment. At that particular moment, our brains were a third the size that they are now. So over 3.5 million years, they tripled in size. Our bodies grew too, but you're right. Let's talk about brains for just a moment, because what's interesting about brains is they're the most nutritionally needy organ in our body. And it's not just that they need a whole bunch of calories. They need the right calories. They need the right food. They need a massive amount of fat, the right kind of food, all of it. So our brains, no doubt, grew 3 times in size over 3.5 million years, and it required a massive amount of nutritional input for that to happen. What's super interesting about the moment that we really see a huge jump in brain size is that even though we started making tools about 3.5 million years ago, it isn't until about 2 million years ago that we see the first major jump in brain size. And that first major jump in brain size was the most significant jump we've ever had. And that's when we go from scavenging animals to hunting animals. And we also have control over fire. And fire is absolutely essential and important for sure. But to me, the access for the entire animal through hunting is what really changed the game. Because prior to that, yes, we were introducing meat into our diet, and that might sound great, but the meat that we were introducing was scavenged from animals that were killed by a predator on the savannah. So all the good stuff, the blood, the fat, and the organs was gone. But what complicates this a little bit is the following. I don't think the increase in nutrition in our diet is what pushed our bodies and our brains to grow. We have to separate this, because I was actually doing a TV piece in Ireland many years ago, and we were walking through the woods, and I was walking with the host of this television show for the show called What Are You Eating? And he caught me really off guard. He said something, and we were talking about introducing meat to the diet and that sort of thing. So we're on that, that wavelength. And he says, "So, do you think that the increase in nutrition in our dietary past is what caused our bodies and our brains to grow?" And I said, "Oh, absolutely." And he looked at me and he said, okay, so what would happen if you fed a chimpanzee a whole lot of food? And I looked at him and I said, you'd have a fat chimpanzee. Like, and he's right. It isn't the fact that, that we were getting better food in our diet that pushed our bodies and our brains to get bigger, because you can feed any animal a whole lot of food and they might get fat, but on a genetic level, they're not going to gain in size. What I believe happened is there was something, or probably a whole suite of things happening that were pushing our brains to grow. And they might have been happening for quite some time, but it wasn't until we were able to support that push with the right kind of nutrition in the right state that our body and brain growth could be supported. So there's a lot of ideas about what was pushing our bodies and our brains to grow. One thought is, and actually it's a thought that from an anthropological sense has a little bit of validity, is the use of hallucinogenic drugs.
Yeah, stoned ape theory.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, pushing brains, pushing limits on thought, and all these things. Could it be? Possibly. I think one of the big drivers as well was the fact that we were making, and it's going to sound silly to somebody that might not have seen it or done it, but making stone tools, I think, was a huge driver. And I'll show you an example. Okay, so this is a replica I made of a 2 million year old hand axe, and this is not very, very difficult to make, but it is very difficult to make because there's fracture mechanics that you have to understand to make this work. And in fact, this was started as a piece of Danish flint that was this big, and I had to plan 6, 7, 8 steps in advance in order to end up at this and not make a mistake that entire time. And I had to think not only in 2 dimensions, I had to think in 3 dimensions. And it's kind of like a Rubik's Cube where when you change one side, it changes the other side. So there's a lot of different things happening that, again, this is an essential tool for their thriving, right? And the ability to make that and teach it to somebody else, that might have been pushing. And then truly, and I think this is one of the biggest driving forces, there's something called Dunbar's number. Have you ever heard of Dunbar's number?
Yes. The kind of the comfort level size of the tribe, right? And once it grows too big, it kind of gets chaotic.
Right. So, and this also speaks to the total amount of meaningful relationships any one person can have.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter if you're living 2,000 years ago without any form of, iPhones and all this, or the fact that we have Instagram and TikTok and everything else right now. It doesn't matter not the amount of people that you have on your friends or your profile for Instagram. How many people can you create maintain meaningful relationships with? And creating and maintaining meaningful relationships is one of the most mentally taxing things that we do. And when we start getting more complex with larger populations and having to govern one another I think that was one of the things that was really pushing our brains to get bigger. And because we were able to access more incredible nutrition from our environment, we supported it.
Yeah, it's like a very interesting soup with a lot of stuff going on there, potentially even some psychedelic mushrooms if you follow that thread as well. It's that evolutionary psychology theory about social structures and dynamics like forcing us to basically use more of the brain's capacity, because Bill's got to remember who his ally is and to tell Jill about Dave. And, it's just very, very complex, right? It's how hard it is to manage yourself, let alone 150 people. So that makes a whole lot of sense. So it seems to be like this just perfect, almost like cosmically aligned little secret soup that put us here today. But being here today is the really interesting, almost like a beautiful burden. I've loved this term, like an evolutionary mismatch or an evolutionary hangover. That basically, like what you said, we're living these high-tech modern lives with somewhat very high-tech but ancient software. It's maladapted for this environment, right? We evolved for the savannas, the jungles, the real jungles, and now we live in concrete jungles. So there is a mismatch here, and it's costing us. And I think one of the primary ways, maybe back to remembering some of that, is through food. But I'm just curious, you talk obviously and think a lot about food. What are the big evolutionary mismatches do you think we're actually experiencing as a modern population right now?
You mean other than food?
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest issues that we have is the sterility of our guts and our body. I mean, the between hand sanitizer and antibiotics and all the other things that are plaguing us all the time, I'm pretty confident that the ripple effect of that is humongous. And I'll give you here's one example. And again, I always relate things back to food, but I think this is a great example. The amount of people today in the world that are experiencing issues from oxalates are off the charts. I mean, off the charts. And it's one of, I think, the biggest health issues that we have to be concerned with at the moment for people that are, that is a dietary related thing. And it's very preventable. And there's a lot of reasons that this is the case. One is because we're taking these foods that are very high oxalate and calling them superfoods and making them available, like spinach and all those things. So that's one reason. But another issue is that one of the bacteria, the microflora that's in our guts that can help us deal with oxalates, gets knocked out very easily with antibiotics. So here is an issue that is an issue because of the modern food system, but is also an issue because of the way that we've been medically treated, in the past several decades, and we have this huge issue. So I do think there is a microflora issue that is not only a problem on our skin, in our guts, but also on our skin, our entire body. From everything from the benefits of things like natural birth and breastfeeding, where you first get this microflora, to antibiotics and hand sanitizer. So I think it's a huge issue. I also think that the connection, and this is more of a, I don't know, not metaphorical sort of thing, but more of a touchy-feely kumbaya sort of thing, but that connection that comes with being outside, experiencing changes in sunlight during the day and weather patterns and all of those things, but most importantly, just as importantly, the changes in seasons.
Yeah.
For as much as I remember was it Food Inc., one of the opening scenes, there's a cart going, grocery cart going through, and I forget who was the host of it or the narrator, but he says, we don't have any seasons in our American grocery stores anymore. We don't have seasons in our lives anymore. The microclimates that we set up for ourselves in our cars and in our offices and in our homes, we run to the car and then we put on the air conditioner or whatever. And don't get me wrong, I love some of these conveniences.
Yeah.
But that connection that comes from being outside and hiking or foraging or hunting and fishing and trapping and doing all of those things, farming, all of those things reconnect us. The circadian rhythm is incredibly important.
Yeah.
But that annual rhythm is just as important, I think.
Oh, that's really cool. The annual rhythm. Yeah. I personally felt a calling back to that, almost 4 years ago now, moved my family to rural Tennessee, and we've got a 15-acre hobby stead here, but we're very in touch with nature because it forces you to be in touch with nature if you choose to live that life. You tend into the chickens, the pigs, foraging. My kid right now is obsessed with mushrooms and different mushrooms that grow at different seasons, and we bring them into the house and we, get our big buck out and see what they are, and some of them we cook and some of them we don't cook because of plant toxins. But it's, we're intricately connected to nature. And it's where I connect most to myself. And if you're into, spiritual, it's probably where a lot of people connect to something like a sense of meaning or God as well. I think it's just fundamentally, we've forgotten who we are. I think you'll appreciate this. I once was with some elders from native tribe, and a question was asked about nature. And what was really interesting is they said they don't really have a word for nature, because to have a word for it would mean to be separate from it. It's like them, and they are part of it and they are part of them. They didn't we have this, I'm going to go take a trip to go to nature. Like I have to vacation to nature. They are like, no, you are nature. We're in it. There is no separation from it. And I was like, that's very interesting, because like you said, we're just in these boxes, so disconnected from the thing, right?
There is a book that makes so much sense. It reminds me, there's a book called Tending the Wild, written by a woman named Kat Anderson. And it's I don't know, it might be 20, 30 years old at this point. It's a great, big, thick book. I have it somewhere behind me, but everybody listening, it's a fantastic book. It is one of those books that is so good that it is worth buying, even just for the introductory chapter. And the introductory chapter, it's written by a Native American woman and in California, and she brings up that same situation. The idea of nature without humans isn't nature. I mean, it is something that's sterile. It's something that's artificial. that when humans are a part of nature in the right way, they help it. It's a symbiotic relationship. And
Yeah.
nature's better for humans and humans are better for nature. So I love the way that you brought that up and phrased it. It's a very good point. And
Yeah.
okay, let me just say one thing very quickly, because I think it's really important here too. Sometimes I get on podcasts or I'm teaching a class and we sort of go off a deep end and I talk about, okay, well, in a perfect world, you should be fermenting all of your dairy and foraging for all of your plants and cooking completely nose to tail and butchering on your kitchen table and doing all these things. And I believe that. But the reality of somebody who's just starting to step into this, doing all of those things in the next month or even in the next 3 years
Right.
is maybe impossible. And I want to make sure the conversation is incredibly empowering to someone who may not be able to do that, but can take a step. It's the same thing with this connection to nature. I am not suggesting that the only way that you can connect is to get up every morning at dawn, take off your shoes, ground for an hour, and then go do this, and then go foraging, and then go sit in a tree. I mean, it's not possible. But even those sporadic opportunities to do that are incredibly reconnecting. Even if you can, I know I have this dream every year, and my son and I do a lot of hunting. But I have this dream every year that, okay, we're going to go out, we're going to be out every single day during bow season or whatever. And it doesn't, well, for him, actually, right now, it does happen. But for me, I'm just too busy. I can't get out all that time. And I feel like I've failed. No, that one, we get out multiple times, but that 1 or 2 times that you can get out, reconnects you from the previous 363 days that you've been, outside of the woods. I mean, that one of my favorite moments in my life, outside of something to do with my wife or my kids, one of my favorite things to do by myself is to watch the woods come alive in the morning, to be out there at dark and to start hearing, the birds and hearing the squirrels and see the sun coming up and going from darkness to seeing things. I mean, it is a magical moment. And I would love to do it multiple times, but even if I just get it a couple times a year, it's powerful.
I love that. It's such an important reminder too. I often try and remind people that it's not about going from like 1 to 100 and getting yourself as maxed out in every area as you can. The most important step is 0 to 1. Just doing anything, even if it's tiny, even if it's just this like small little daily practice that you do, which is energy generative and will probably lead to you doing other things. But we definitely can be guilty in the health space sometimes of setting unrealistic expectations and not meeting people where they're at right now, but more so trying to serve as aspirational, like, hey, we can get there one day, but we've got to do what we can do with the tools that we've got available to us right now. And also not get trapped in this unhealthy obsession with health, like this orthorexic world where once you become aware of everything that's out to get you, you can become a little bit neurotic about it, right? When you was talking about this anti-disinfectant, Lysol wipe everything conundrum, just this weekend I was at a conference. Funny because you're interacting, it's a CrossFit conference, everybody's in there is like trying to be healthy and it's in a sterile environment with artificial lights, and I'm like, this is the furthest thing from health. It wouldn't be great if we were doing this in the woods kind of thing. But I'm watching the buffet line of food that's probably cooked in seed oils and non-organic, but the wait staff that are putting out the plates are clearly bringing clean plates from a commercial dishwasher that's probably had all kinds of stuff on them, and now wiping every plate with a Lysol wipe before giving it to the person to serve them foods. And I'm just like, my head is exploding. I'm like, and people aren't even they're not seeing it. They're not thinking this is remotely strange. They're just getting like a completely nuked plate and then putting hot, steamy, crappy food on it. And it's just like, I kind of just had to laugh because I'm like, I'll just drive myself insane, actually, if I worry about every little thing. So I think that's a really healthy call out too. Just little by little, a little becomes a lot. Relax a little bit, do what you can with the tools you've got, and keep learning and keep moving.
One of the ways is, I have like 17 different examples of the same of what you just, and it drives you nuts too. But at the same time, we have to navigate this in some way and without losing our minds. So one way that I like to phrase it is that we're modern. We should think of ourselves as modern day hunter-gatherers. Hunter-gatherers would find themselves in all sorts of different environments. And sometimes it was an incredible environment that had all sorts of great resources. And in other times it was much more scarce. And they made it through all of those situations because in most cases, I'm convinced, they figured out how to make the best of every single given situation. And they moved on to the next one. So whether they were in the Pacific Northwest, which is one of the most lush environments in the world, or they were in the middle of a desert, they figured it out with what they had available and moved on. And I think that's, we have different environments, but our environments that we have to navigate are a restaurant or an office party or a friend's house or whatever those things are. And I think we can give ourselves a little bit of grace, because what I used to do in those situations when I was much more orthorexic about these things than I am now was I would go in and I'm not eating anything here. And there's a lot of social capital you lose for that. And you're miserable. And maybe there are some situations where you shouldn't eat anything in front of you. Don't get me wrong. But I found it. But what happened is if I broke that, if that was my goal, and I said I'm not eating anything, and then the night went on, and I ate a Triscuit or whatever, and all of a sudden my mind went, I failed, and I would go off the deep end.
Yeah.
The better situation is you go and say, this is the environment that I have to work with, just like I'm a modern day hunter gatherer. Let me make the best choices with what's around me, feel good about it, and then move on.
Bingo. Exactly that. And I will say this too. This isn't a free pass to descend into chaos and eat whatever you want. You still want to focus on quality. But one of the unintended consequences and very positive side effects of being on a health journey for so long is the increase in resilience. Early on, when I was sick, a vegetable oil gluten bomb would wreck me and I'd be having bad bowel movements. Now, if I do eat adverse foods now, given that it's so rare, I can kind of split test this pretty profoundly. Like, how does this affect me? Because I've made this my life for about 10 years and I'm so dialed in so many areas that if I do eat the junk and the crap, it's just it's a blip. And I think that resilience piece is also health. Like maybe it's because my gut microbiome is so strong and diverse now. Maybe it's because my metabolism runs so hot. Maybe it's because I've got all these other factors dialed in that fried chicken and seed oils is about the worst thing you can eat. But if I do eat it once in a bloody blue moon, then I feel generally fine and I just get back on track with my next meal. So the resilience piece of doing this over the long run is really important too. You're not just strengthening the outside and building muscles, you're strengthening the inside. And I think to your point, this gut piece is very central to that.
Sure, absolutely. And I would add that resilience comes not only physically, but also mentally. The ability to eat that piece of chicken, and that's the end of it. And you've then,
Relax,
gone back to, but eating that piece of chicken and then you go on a 3-week binge will set you in a hole that's very difficult to come out of.
Yes, that's very different. Yeah. So let's go back to this, the hunter-gatherer lens again, because you said that the human digestive tracts has really given us great clues about how we should eat. In your estimation and your current understanding, like what is something like the optimal human diet then? Because I don't think you're going down the plant-based agenda here.
No, I'm absolutely not going down the plant-based agenda. So the optimal human diet, it's a great question. And it's hard to answer, but I'll tell you where I am at the moment with it. So number one, from a sort of macronutrient standpoint, I think protein and fat are the two most important things we should be consuming. And in most cases, not all cases, but in most cases, we don't have a need for we don't have a physical need for carbohydrates. So and I eat on a regular basis a very animal heavy, almost always ketogenic diet.
Okay. Yep.
Most of the time. It is loaded with animal-based fats, animal-based protein, and that also does include eggs and cheese as well. I think cheese or fermented dairy in general is a fantastic source of nutrition for humans. That said, I do eat. We serve vegetables here, and I do eat some vegetables, and I'm very selective about the ones that I eat. And the ones that I eat, I make sure that are either low in toxins and are bioavailable, or I do something to them to make them to decrease their toxicity and then make them more bioavailable. So I know that isn't directly necessarily answering your question, but I think this is maybe a more direct answer. I think a low carbohydrate, high fat, high protein diet from animal sources should be sort of the foundation of our diets. And when we include vegetables, we need to be selective about those vegetables, and they have to check a number of boxes to get into my mouth. Now, that said, that's from a nutritional perspective. The interesting thing about humans and the complicating thing about humans, and I know we've talked about the technologies needed to do this, this, and this, that's all important. But the other thing that's important about humans, and we can't, too many conversations around food don't address this. We have to be nourished in every single way to be a fully nourished human. So we don't just need to meet, or if we just meet our nutritional needs, that doesn't fully nourish us. We need to meet our emotional needs and cultural needs and political needs and religious needs and all those other needs. For many of us, there's a lot of other needs. And sometimes they're at odds with one another, right? I go home to Thanksgiving, and my wife's favorite thing at Thanksgiving is a green bean casserole that her mother would make with the Campbell's soup, mushroom soup in there and the Funyuns on top and the whole thing. If I didn't eat that, I'd be in huge trouble.
Not optimal.
So, an example I give in my book that I'm so embarrassed about it that I don't even want to say it out loud, but I missed multiple birthdays from my kids. I was at the birthday, but I wouldn't eat a piece of cake for multiple years because I didn't think I should eat it. From a nutritional perspective, I was absolutely right. But some of those cakes, like there was a cake for my youngest daughter that my older daughter made for her, and I didn't even have a piece. I can't get that opportunity back. Eating that cake would have been a much better choice than not eating it. So it's a balance, and we have these conversations, and there's people out there with the apps and the graph paper and the carbohydrates and protein and all these things, and it's important. Don't get me wrong, to understand those pieces, but if you're solely focused on the nutritional aspect of the food, I'm convinced you're never going to be fully nourished. And even if you are fully nourished, it's not going to last if it can't fit within your lifestyle. So what I like to say is, we are in 300,000-year-old bodies with the same nutritional requirements that our ancestors had in many ways. But we're living in a modern context with very diverse needs and very different than our ancestors had. So we have to make that all come together in order to be fully nourished.
Yeah, it's very well said. Sounds a lot like somebody that's been in the trenches for a long time. That's wisdom, And I was the same way, man. I can't count the amount of social things that I missed out on because I was too righteous in my beliefs about gluten or seed oils. And in hindsight, a meal here or there is not going to be the thing that makes or breaks you. And I think that's very smart for people to just hear from somebody that, is held in very high esteem in this world as well, that, it's the best diet, quote unquote, is the one that you can probably adhere to for the longest, that's built on some solid foundational pillars. Because as if it doesn't work over a very long and consistent time frame, then it's not going to work. So it has to be something that fits into your lifestyle. And I think that's very important. Coming back to the plant world, you mentioned vegetables. I want to talk about vegetables versus fruit. If you could only pick a vegetable or from the fruit family, which one would you personally go for?
Oh, 100% fruit. And again, this is coming from somebody who eats very, very low carb. And it's funny, I say something that had that much sugar. There are three things in the world that are on this planet for the purpose of being eaten by something else. One is milk, one is honey, and the other is ripe fruit. And because of that, and this is super important for everybody to understand, only ripe fruit. And I don't want to go down a rabbit hole with it, but the sole purpose of ripe fruit is to attract an animal to come and eat the fruit so that it takes the mature seeds, passes it through its digestive tract, and it gets deposited in a pile of manure somewhere, and that those seeds sprout and they make the big plant. That works. From an evolutionary sense, that works perfect. At the same time, the sole purpose of an unripe fruit is to keep things away until those seeds are mature. From an evolutionary standpoint, if an immature seed is consumed, it is a death sentence for every single seed in there, because there's no chance of it sprouting and making the baby plant. So this is really important to understand. And I know there's so many unripe fruits in our diets, and at a low level, it's not a very big deal. But even a unripe tomato has a toxin in it called tomatine, which is not present when it becomes ripe. So, and a lot of these toxins get turned off because, remember, trying to keep things away and repel when it's unripe, and then when it's ripe, it looks good, it smells good, it tastes good, and it's very low or no toxin in it. So a ripe fruit is incredibly toxic. But Again, the technology I think is really important here. I would take that a step further, and this might not be a popular opinion, but since we're having the conversation, a fermented ripe fruit is even better.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a hypothesis called the drunken monkey hypothesis that an anthropologist in California came up with I think about 20 years ago or so. And the suggestion is that all mammals are naturally drawn to alcohol. And the suggestion that he makes in his book, and it's actually a really good read, is an unripe fruit is toxic. A fully ripe fruit, in most cases, is not. But sometimes it's hard to tell. You can guarantee that fruit is definitely fully ripe if it started to ferment, and the sugars are available, and it's on the ground, and it's doing all those things. So it is a survival instinct, right, to go and consume fruit that has been fermented, and it is an alcohol fermentation, it's a yeast fermentation, but to go ahead and consume that. And I forget the number I saw the other day, that an average chimpanzee in the wild consumes the equivalent of like 2 or 3 beers for a human worth of alcohol on a regular basis.
Wow.
I'm not suggesting that we should all go out and start drinking, and if you're not drinking, that you should start drinking. And that's not what I'm suggesting at all. But I do think everybody listening has an image in their head of what the past was like. And if you are modeling your current dietary patterns and many aspects of your life based on that view, I want to make sure everybody has a full picture of what that looks like. And I can guarantee every single person that has a view of what the past was like is partially wrong, including me, because we just don't know. But I want everybody to keep their minds wide open and understand a few things. Our ancestors consumed alcohol. Now, I don't know. It's nothing like going to the liquor store now and buying a bottle of gin. That's a completely different thing. If you are basing your diet on an ancestral approach, a couple things are important. Our ancestors did consume alcohol. It was all wild, spontaneously fermented. There were no additives. It was different than most of us have access to, but they did. And every single one of our ancestors ate bugs. I know that it's been hugely polarizing in the meat eating community right now, but we were eating bugs before we started eating meat. We were eating bugs the entirety of the time we were eating meat. And there's a lot of traditional groups around the world that continue to consume bugs as a major part of their diet. Bugs are incredibly nourishing. They are and very sustainable to farm and to raise and to consume. So I do think we need to broaden our minds with this. But the reason I bring that up is it's just one other example of a technology that takes a food that maybe we should or shouldn't be consuming and turns it into something that is in moderation safer, obviously in larger doses. It's not safe.
There you go. Yeah, this is so fun. We've got stoned apes, drunken monkeys. But like you said, you have to keep an open mind. It seems like our ancestors were having a grand old time, and they happened to make it. I'm sure there was a lot of difficulty too, but they made it, and they put us here so we can have these wonderful debates and pontificate on what the past was like, and decide whether. I mean, speaking of alcohol, right? I know you've got some firsthand experience with the blue zones, and one of the things that seems to be a bit of an outlier in those communities is, right? They're not smashing gin and tonics or drinking 6 packs of beer, but there's a lot of socialization. There's also a lot of wine sometimes drank in these communities too. What surprised you about the blue zones? Because you've been to Sardinia was one you visited, correct?
Yeah, and that was the one we spent the most time in, and was, first of all, everything that you've heard about the longevity and the populations and how not only lifespan but health span and physically and mentally fit, even in past 100, is spot on. I mean, what we experienced there was spot on. The amount of just natural exercise that people got on a regular basis was spot on. The fact that there's a particular variety of wine that is one of the things in Sardinia. I think it's a Cantaloupe grape. I forget how to pronounce it. That is supposed to be one of these things helping with the longevity. I don't know if it helps it or not, but they do drink a good bit of it for sure. The diet, though, the makeup of the diet was the exact opposite of everything that I had ever
right.
learned.
It's pushed as very plant heavy, right? Bordering on vegetarianism and vegan.
It was 100% the exact opposite. I mean, not only was the basis of everything animals, but it was the entirety of the animal. And in fact, it was quite beautiful. And I know it's a strange word when we're talking about organ meats and intestines and things like that. The amount of intestines that were consumed would blow your mind. So the first meal that we had there, so the one family we were staying with, let me back up. The reason we were actually going, and it took me about 8 or 9 years to make the contacts I needed for the main purpose for this research trip. We were actually going to learn about a particular type of bread called panaspelli, which is an ancient bread that's made with acorns. And it's made with acorns using clay and using ash to detoxify the acorns. And
Wow.
Pliny the Elder writes about it. I mean, it's this wonderful thing. In fact, it's considered to be the precursor to modern polenta. So this went from acorns,
Wow.
eventually got replaced by chestnuts, and then eventually got replaced by maize when maize came over from the New World. But at the time I learned about it, I'm very one of the things that I focus on in my research is traditional ways of detoxifying plants. And something that comes up repeatedly is the role of clay and ash in different contexts in Bolivia and California, all sorts of places. But when I heard about this bread, I'm like, I have to go and learn how to make this bread. And I tried to find somebody that can make it, And everybody told me, no, everybody's dead that ever made this bread. You're never going to find out you're never going to be able to make this bread. And you can read about it. And I would read about it, but there's no good accounts on how to make this bread. So I finally caught a break, and this went on for years and years and years. And then I finally caught a break several years ago where the oak tree that the acorns that make this bread come from, there was some National Park Service in Italy thing being done to protect these trees. And they went out and they found somebody in this village that knew how to make this bread still. And I, through a couple of different people, were able to contact her. And it turns out she was too old to show. I mean, she was very, very old to show anybody, but she had shown her son. So we went to learn from her son, which was fantastic.
It's so cool.
And the person that was the contact with her is this food historian in Sardinia, this woman, Gisela Rubio. And she said, you come visit me first and you spend some time with us. I said, okay. Well, we went to visit her in this really remote area, and it was the village of Villa Grande, which turns out to be the epicenter of the first blue zone ever identified. And it was purely by coincidence. And when I realized that's a reward, I'm like, wow. And I started documenting everything. And so the first night we were there, the big meal is they had, it was a big, huge hunk of meat from a lamb. And then they took all the intestines and wrapped it next to it. And the whole thing was on a rotisserie this entire time. And we ate all the intestines. We ate the meat and we see this thing repeated over and over again. We made a cheese called Caio de Cabreto, which you make from a very young unweaned goat. But after we took the stomach out of this goat, for that, we literally ate every single, it was called Satritalia. They took, so we're up in the mountains with these shepherds making this cheese, and they built this really long fire, and they took the motors that run the windshield wipers in the vehicles, and they made these rotisserie things with them. And they had two, one on either side of this really long fire. And on one side, on one rotisserie, they took all the meat and bones, including the head, the eyeballs, the whole thing, and they were able to cut it in a way that it went the entire way of the skewer. So every bit of meat and bone was there. And on the other side, they took all the organs, except for the stomach, which we had already for the cheese. They took all the organs and cubed them up and put them on a skewer like a kebab. And then they took the small intestines, didn't even wash it out with the contents, wrapped it around it like yarn. And then they took the large intestines, which they did rinse out, and then wrapped that around. And they just went on these kebabs. And I have to tell you, it was absolutely delicious. But this is the reality of the blue zone. Every time we went and visited somebody, the first thing they did was they brought out some of the cheese they'd made and cured meats that they had, and that you sat down and had this, and over and over and over again. It was the massive amount of animal, I don't want to say meat, animal, massive amount of cheese. And then did they eat vegetables? Yes, they were, but they were the afterthought. I mean, there was obviously some tomatoes, there were some olives, there was some lettuce, arugula, garlic, onions, and I think that's about it.
Yeah.
And they laughed because the house we were staying in, BBC had come and done about a year and a half earlier, had done a special on, and all they wanted to know, the BBC, because the Blue Zone, I guess minestrone soup is supposed to be a big thing in Sardinia, and they're like, they keep asking us about minestrone soup, and I have no idea what they're talking about.
They're like with the real stuff, they're not even asking about. It's so interesting. It's very cool to have that experience, man. And they are doing, I mean, our whole message, Heart and Soil, is nose to tail. And unfortunately, because it's so hard to find here, or people kind of grossed out by it, they don't want to cook it. We've, desiccated them and put them in pills to try and make that dense level of nutrition available to people. But it's really cool to hear people are still out there, they're doing it truly the way our ancestors probably did forever, because why would they waste any part of the animal? It makes no sense, right? And I like that distinction you made between meat and animal. Like, we just think when we say meat-based or an animal-based diet, people just immediately get visions of fillets or ribeyes in the head. But there's a whole host of the animal that you're not thinking about and missing out on this connective tissue, the bone marrow, the organs, the heart, the livers, spleens, pancreas, kidneys, testicles even. It's all edible. It's all edible.
One of the things, we're immersed in the restaurant world right now. One of the things that I dislike about the trends in the restaurant world is when the terms are incredibly disconnecting, and it both for people working in the kitchen, but also for people coming to the restaurant to dine as well in most of these contexts. And I get why, because we're so incredibly far removed, but and it just follows trends. One of the things that drives me nuts is that I don't like to use the term meat. I like to use the term animal, right? Because it immediately, if you're talking about eating and you say the word animal, it is a different image in your head than if you say meat, you're thinking about a ribeye, right? But they don't even use the word meat in most kitchens anymore. They use the word protein. And what's the protein on the plate? What's the protein on the plate? We need some protein. We need some protein. And not to say protein's bad. Protein's an amazing thing. But it is just that language, just that word is not a connected word. It's a word that distances us from the idea of, look, I eat a massive amount of animal. I have an animal-based diet. But the last thing I should do is forget that an animal actually lived and then died, and then I'm consuming it. And I know we like to be sheltered from that, but I think it's a very dangerous thing to do, both for ourselves and for the planet, to not have that connection. And just the way that we term things, it makes a big difference. So, that idea, animal, is the way we should be thinking about it, not just meat. And certainly,
I think it's very important. Yeah, it's something, I know you'll get this because of your background and hunting and everything. This connection to food is something that we do really need to re-pedestalize somehow. Conversations like this certainly help. Books like yours certainly help. But until you've experienced it, there is just an innate disconnection. I remember, I have a vivid memory of sitting with my nephew a few years ago. He was maybe 10 or 11 at the time. And, he got a treat for doing well at school, and he wanted to go to Wendy's. So I'm like, all right, it's your choice, dude. You go to Wendy's. And he's eating a hamburger. So I asked him, do you know what that burger is? And you could just see the puzzled look on his face. He's like, it's ham. I'm like, well, what's ham? And he's like, is it chicken? And I'm just like, whoa, we have a serious disconnection from our food. And of course, it's not really being taught, like this disassociation. Now we talk about protein, we don't talk about animals. And me moving back here and raising animals and taking animals' life, like talk about a red pill to reconnecting back to your food. It kind of changes the way you look at all of this stuff. And I think it's very healthy because it's us remembering where we came from again.
Yeah, I found out long ago, I used to be very strong in trying to convert people to eat the way that I do. And I realized in a number of different ways that doesn't make sense and is a lost cause. I do want to provide as much information as possible in case some of it is accurate, that people can use when they're ready to make their own decisions and own changes. But I do think part of it is just like that conversation a few minutes ago where we talked about ancestral diets and what they really, really consisted of and what that really means. Everybody needs to have access to all the tools in the toolkit in order to, perform a certain job. And part of that is, how do they want to feed themselves, and what are they using as markers for making decisions? So just a very quick example. So I taught at Washington College for 13 years, several universities before that. But at Washington College, every single year in the fall, I would run a primitive technology class. And the purpose of the class was to engage and learn about a number of different prehistoric technologies. But I wanted it all to be cohesive. So what we would do is we would create these technologies and use them, and over the semester build a final meal with all the different pieces we would do. So one of the first things we did was we would make very basic stone tools. And then the next week I would bring in a bunch of deer, and then they would butcher the deer with the tools. That would, again, it would get used for a number of things later on, but it wasn't making the tool. They got to make the tool and then use the tool and see how efficient it was and all this. And every single, I mean, you can imagine, I'm teaching a bunch of super excited, 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds, and many of them are ready to change the world, which is awesome. And many of them are coming from the perspective that, I'm going to change the world because I'm going to be a vegan or a vegetarian. So I was faced with this every semester. Somebody, at least one, if not multiple people, that were either vegetarian or vegan in this class. And I tell them, look, I need you, because of what this class is and what you signed up for, I need you to at least see the efficiency of these ancient tools in performing this very important role. I do not need you to touch the deer. I do not need you to get your hands bloody, but I need you to be there. And I promise you, as long as you're there and engaged, you can get an A for the class, just like everybody else who's elbow deep inside the deer. But I need you to be there and be engaged. That's all. And I truly meant it. I promise you, and this is not by any means a stretch. This is exactly what happened. Every single year I had somebody that was either a vegan or a vegetarian, sometimes multiple students. And by the end of every class, everybody in that class was elbow deep inside of the deer.
Yeah.
And if some of them decided to start eating meat afterwards, some of them didn't, but they never had an opportunity to even have all the tools in order to make the decisions about how they were literally living their entire lives and their viewpoint about the world and how they were a part of this world. They never had that opportunity. And when they were faced in a very safe environment to explore things, you can't imagine how they dove in. And it was really rewarding.
That's very powerful. Yeah. A few of the team members at Heart and Soil have been to, they've been out to Epic, who do like
Force of Nature.
Force of Nature.
Ranch, yeah.
And they do this amazing bison harvest, and they just get to experience something up close and personal, and everybody to a T almost describes it as like a remembering. There was something like ancient that kind of goes like, oh yeah. And I imagine those people experience something similar to when they just see it up close and personal. There's no denying the human, like what got us here. And in many ways, the choice to be vegan or vegetarian, however you choose to end up there, is kind of like a first world. It's like a luxury belief almost, because you can choose that now because you have these wonderful supermarkets and you can fly in your acai from Brazil and your bananas from Peru and whatever else. But it's not certainly what got us here. There are no hunter-gatherer societies, to my knowledge, that were plant-based or vegan, and it's probably because you're leaving some nutrition on the table. And I think reconnecting back to where you came from and your food is very important if we are to, steer ourselves forward as we, who knows what we're doing now, trying to fly to the moon or Mars and, all of that stuff. It's going to get weird. And I think this is at least an anchor to something that is real because it's rooted in our history,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Talk to me, we're coming up short on time here in a moment, but a couple of big hitters that we know, a couple of sacred cows that we need to address before I let you depart today. Sure. Fiber. Is fiber overrated in your opinion?
I don't want to pretend that I know enough to speak eloquently or informed on this, but I will tell you that for the past 6 years, a large part of that time I've eaten no fiber, and the other bit of that time I've eaten a little bit of fiber. And if we're going to talk about food, we have to talk about poop. I am incredibly regular and have no issues in that department whatsoever. So I'm not sure if there are contexts where an increased fiber intake makes sense. There could be, but I don't think it's necessary for a healthy human.
Raw dairy. You mentioned 3 foods that you thought were somewhat perfect to be consumed, or the purpose really is to be consumed by other mammals or living organisms: fruit, honey, and dairy. It's a pretty foundational to our pyramid here. It's nose to tail animals at the bottom, and then we love our raw dairy, we love fruit, we love honey, and sweetening things that way if you're going to go down the higher carbohydrate. It became very popular in the last couple of years, even made its way to the political stage. I know you've been an advocate, but you're pretty bullish on the raw dairy.
We only have a few minutes left, and you hit me with dairy now? Really? In the context of milk, liquid milk, raw dairy, good raw dairy is 100% the gold standard by far. There's no comparison for a number of different reasons. But I will say this: we adult humans are different than we were as infant humans. And when you look at it from an ancestral stance, liquid milk is a brand new thing, except for when we were infants, right? Other than the Samburu and the Maasai who drink raw milk and blood every single day, a combination, mixed up. Indigenous and traditional groups don't drink milk. Like, it's not a thing. And there's a number, and it's so weird for us to fathom because the entire dairy industry in this world is based on liquid dairy, which requires refrigeration and pasteurization and all these other sorts of things. So while if we're talking about liquid milk, raw milk is the gold standard, the platinum, right? The next step up is fermented dairy. And the reason that fermented dairy is that much better is because when we ferment dairy, we're actually replicating what happened inside of our bodies as infant humans when we were consuming the milk. So when we take milk and we make kefir or yogurt or even better, aged cheeses or clabber or that sort of thing, we are taking a food that for many of us, right, there's 60 to 70% of adult humans in this world are lactose intolerant, that many of us can't handle as humans. And using a natural biological process, the same one that happened inside of our bodies when we were infants, replicating that, and now we turn it into something that we can safely and efficiently derive nutrition from. So when we ferment our dairy, the lactobacillus bacteria are eating the lactose, reducing that, and the longer it ferments, the less that's there. So, our yogurt that we make here at the Modern Stone Age Kitchen, we ferment for 24 hours. It is a lactose-free food. Most of your traditional, especially aged cheeses, are lactose-free foods naturally because it was consumed by the bacteria. So if your issue with dairy is lactose, then fermented dairy is something that you should pay attention to. But I will say this too, and I just recently really understood the power of this. In the 1930s, Dr. Weston Price, did his work and traveled the world, and he figured out, one of the things he documented with all these different diets is this key thing in most of these diets he called the activator X. And he didn't know what it was, but he knew it was key to everybody being healthy. And in 2007, Chris Masterjohn figured out that he was talking about vitamin K2.
Yeah.
One of the best sources of vitamin K2 in the world is fermented dairy. And especially we call mesophilic fermented dairy. So dairy can ferment at different temperatures, but the ones that ferment at room temperature we call mesophilic fermentations. And those produce not only the most amount of K2, but the most diverse. There's different forms of K2, the most diverse forms of K2. Now, K2 does a lot of different things. It helps it's necessary to synthesize vitamin D, vitamin A, and it also tells calcium where to go in the bodies, like go into the bones and don't go into your heart and into your arteries. So K2 is incredibly important. And so dairy from grass-fed animals has some K2 in it. Not a ton, but it has a little bit in it. All fermented dairy, mesophilic fermented dairy, has an increased amount of K2 in it. And I'm not a fan of milk coming from grain-fed cows, but because of the way that K2 is produced during the fermentation, you can even get K2 in a fermented dairy product that came from an animal that was eating grain. Again, I'm not saying that that's what we should be doing.
Right.
So I bring that up because in the world of having these conversations about food and diet and health and all these things and processing, we tend to default back to categories or terms that could mean a wide range of things: bread, butter, milk. And those are, to even have a conversation using just those terms is absolutely ridiculous. One of the things that Weston Price Foundation loves is butter, and they should. Butter is an amazing food. Fermented butter made from fermented cream, which is the way butters are made for 6,000 years, is a completely different food than sweet cream butter. And this vitamin K2 is a great example of that.
Dude, that's such a good call out, and a teaser for the next time we run it back, because there's so much more we could get into. Before I let you go, a super quick one though, because the bros are going to want to know. I sent some cauliflower here, and you're in incredible shape. You're in your 50s now. Is that wrestling earned? Is it jiu-jitsu earned? And what do you do to stay fit these days?
That is wrestling earned. I wrestled in high school. I wrestled at Ohio State. I even actually finished my
Oh,
final
right
year at the
on.
college in New Jersey. So this is all wrestling right here. And actually, several surgeries later, it used to look a
Oh,
lot
really?
worse than this.
Wow.
And right now, my wife and I, we get to the gym usually 3 days a week. Super fast. I'm only in there about 45 minutes at a
Yeah.
time. And when we can, we run. But actually, running this place here, we are on our feet all the time.
Yeah, yeah. Cool. Tell us a tiny bit about what you were talking about when you referenced running this place right here and where people could go to keep up with you and everything that you're getting up to. Because you got your fingers in a lot of pies, my friend.
We sure do. We sure do. Thank you. So my family and I have a restaurant called the Modern Stone Age Kitchen, and we have a nonprofit called the Modern Stone Age Food Lab. And the Food Lab is our nonprofit focused on research and teaching and outreach. So we still do a massive amount of research with indigenous and traditional groups, documenting how they're eating, document how they prepare food, share food with them, bring that information back, and it becomes the basis for what we teach, but also what we create down in the restaurant. We do a ton of classes, both in person and online. And I just want to put a shout out real quick. 2 months ago, we just started because people were asking an online community called the Ancestral Table. And we
Amazing.
have, just because some people can't make it here for an in-person class, every single Monday we get together at noon and we do a live half-an-hour class followed by a bunch of Q&A, and we interact during the week anyhow. And everything we do, it's live, but it's also professionally recorded, so it goes up into a library. And we're just building a huge stockpile. And we have people from all over the country that are interacting during the week and asking questions and posting pictures, and it's great. We cover everything from nose to tail butchering to how to start and maintain your sourdough mother. So the Ancestral Table, I'm really, really proud of that. And then, so downstairs, we have a fully operating restaurant called the Modern Stone Age Kitchen, where everything that we've learned throughout this research, we implement actually 100%. There's no two ingredients put together outside of our walls, except for Old Bay and chocolate. And I was even making our chocolate from scratch. It just got to be too much. We make everything. We don't use any nut or seed oils. All of our flour is through a wild sourdough process. Grains, nuts, seeds, and legumes are soaked or sprouted or nixtamalized or fermented, and the list can go on and on. But we actually have been able to create a fully functioning restaurant without any compromises whatsoever. And what's really cool, and I would love anybody to come and share a meal with us here, is we have taken the restaurant model and turned it completely on its head. And we didn't expect the part that I'm going to tell you right now. And this is super exciting. Because we make every single thing entirely from scratch in-house, it requires a massive amount of labor. We have 35 people. We're not even that big. We have 35 people right now working tirelessly to create all this food. And our labor costs are off the charts. And if I showed you our books and just showed you the labor costs, you'd say you're going to be out of business in 2 weeks. But what's crazy is that because we're making it all in-house with these massive labor costs, our food costs are actually quite low compared to another restaurant. So, because all the value add is happening here, which allows us to not only buy directly from, people talk about farm to table. Like, we're literally communicating and sourcing directly from our farmers and our neighbors right here. So the combined costs of our labor and our food together, even though it's the opposite of another restaurant, is about the same. But when you come and buy something here, that money is going literally directly to somebody in this community that's working here and a farmer that's in this community as well.
Amazing.
And it's actually working, and it's brilliant, and we're so incredibly proud of it. We're open breakfast and lunch every day, and we only do one dinner a week, and that's on Friday nights. We do wood-fired pizzas because it takes us all week to make the cheese and the pepperoni and all the pieces to it. So we can connect. You can find us online at modernstoneage.com. All the information about that is available there. And then on Instagram, my Instagram is at Dr. Bill Schindler, so at Dr. Bill Schindler. And all the other pieces I mentioned are at The Modern Stone Age.
Incredible. It's so cool what you're up to, man. I think the next time we run this podcast back, it's going to be after me taking a trip up there. We're going to have a feast, and then we're going to record the follow-up to this conversation. How's that sound?
That sounds perfect. Let me know when you're coming. I'd love to see you.
Thank you very much, Bill. Appreciate you a lot. Go pick up the buck, eat like a human, and you lot, we'll see you next week. Peace. All right, friends, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Radical Health Radio. We got a fresh new podcast for you every Wednesday. If you enjoyed the show, consider liking, subscribing, reviewing, and rating us on your podcast platform. It helps to spread this message of radical health. We'll see you next week.